Hi, I'm Tony Williams, and this is Brooklyn Savvy. Hi, I'm Tony Williams, and this is Brooklyn Savvy. Now, we're going to be talking about Think Outside the Cell with Sheila Rule. But before I formally introduce you to Brooklyn and beyond, I need to introduce our Savvy panel. We have Daniela Romano, Ellen Salpeter, and Jennifer Jones Austin. Now, Sheila, your story came to me through my sister because she talked to me about what phenomenal work you were doing in the prison system. And she talked about your work with Think Outside the Cell. So could you share with us what your journey has been with this project?
Yes, thank you. First, thank you very much for having me. This all began actually one Sunday, about 12 years ago. I was at Riverside Church, and it happened to be Homecoming Sunday, when the minister's back after the summer. All the various clubs and organizations have their pamphlets out, lots of goodies to attract people.
The recruitment.
Right, absolutely, looking for new members. And so I'm basically wandering through the tables, and I see the prison ministry table. A woman sitting there says, "You need to join the prison ministry." And I was struck by her delivery. I said, okay.
What does this mean?
I said, okay. And what went through my mind was, maybe there's something I can do to help, particularly since there's so many people who look like me behind the walls. So I started going to meetings, and at some point they said, "You're a writer. You're a journalist. Will you?"
Yes, because you worked for the New York Times as a foreign correspondent.
Well, for 31 years I was at the New York Times. And I was there at that time. And so they said, "You're a writer. Would you respond to letters we received?" I said, "Sure." And that changed my life. It really changed my life.
In what way did that change your life?
I saw through those letters the beauty, the skill, the humanity of people who were demonized, despised, stereotyped. I saw their humanity. And so it made me say, I've got to do something more than write letters. I've got to do something that really moves the dial. So that's how it started changing my life.
And so you did that, and you did that in a really interesting way. You met your husband.
Right.
Would you share that with us?
Yeah, well, at some point I became Sheila of the Riverside Church Prison Ministry. So I'm getting all these letters because I really.
Did you go to the prison? These were letters nationally from
No, these were letters from New York State. And the rule was that if you wrote as a volunteer, you could not visit. You know, in other words, you could not be a volunteer going into prisons.
Right.
You could visit an individual person, but you could not be a volunteer going into prisons. So you had to make a choice. So my choice was to write the letters. And so I was, at some point, I was like a pen pal to about 20-something people. I mean, that was in addition to just the over-the-transom people wanting books.
Men and women?
Yes, men and women. And so at some point I got a letter from Joseph Robinson, who wanted someone to write to. So I'm Sheila from the prison ministry. And he said that, "I'd like to write to a young woman." You know, and that, like a term. And so I wrote back, and I'm very literal. And I said, "We don't have any young women in the prison ministry." I said, "But I wish you well." And I said, "I know you will find someone for you," because it was such a lovely letter, a beautiful letter. And so I sent it off, forgot about it, moved on. Joe wrote back because he's a man who really wants to be understood, and he thought I'd misunderstood. He said, "That's a turn of phrase." That wants to be understood. Right? Yeah. He said, "That's just a turn of phrase." It doesn't have to be a young woman. I just really like to write to somebody, blah-de-blah-de. So I said, and it was such a beautiful letter. I said, "Joe, I will write to you." I said, "I cannot be a companion, but I can be your friend. And that's how it began. That's how.
And how long did you write to him as his friend?
More than a year.
How many
More than a year. Oh, God, so many letters, so many letters. And we really, really began to kind of reveal ourselves in terms of our truths, in terms of our yearnings, in terms of our
So was it like
problems.
a diary in some respects when you write these letters? Just or a journal or?
Well, you know, I saved all of those letters because they were.
Well, it was a courtship of sorts.
Well, it was
Well,
a
it's
courtship of
definitely a
sorts.
courtship,
Although,
right?
but I think, you know, more than that, it really was kind of a journey of the spirit, because I really was touched in so many ways, and even a friend when I was in I had a therapist, Dorothy, wonderful, and Dorothy said, "This is a profound experience."
Wow.
She said, "This is a profound experience that a lot of people will never experience."
So how were you able to work through stigma? Since stigma is so much a part of dealing with people that are incarcerated and then having to kind of wear that in a way, or how did you deal with that?
Well, you know, initially I was naive, and I said, "Wow, this is a great man," and so I'm telling people, "I've met this great guy, blah blah blah," you know, and he. Well, where is he? He's incarcerated. What's wrong with you?
Right.
You're not desperate. You know, you don't look that bad. You know? So at some point, that to me said, I was never ashamed, but I was protective.
Right.
I was protective of Joe. I was protective of my relationship, and I was protective of myself. I said, do I need this toxic reaction? Do I need this poison around me, including from people I love, people who
Probably have your best interest.
It might
they think they have
definitely.
your best
Absolutely,
interest at heart.
absolutely.
It's coming from a good place.
It's coming from a good place,
Right.
and I had to.
about educating people.
It's about educating people, and so it was a lesson for me about the work to be done.
How supportive is the prison system when it comes to marriage and relationships and family?
It is. I'd say it's spotty at best. When you talk about the prison system, when you talk about the nationally, there are only 6 states that have conjugal visits. Federal prison system does not.
Wow.
And it's been proven, actually, through well-respected research that those family ties are critical.
Yeah, they keep you moving.
Well,
right?
they keep you moving.
And
They keep you engaged with the world.
Right.
They keep you feeling supported. They are your support system as you move home. I mean, it's critical to have those kinds of relationships. And if not family, then friends and community ties.
Whether it's the ministry or anybody else.
Right.
Just, having that support.
Right. And hope is critical. Yeah.
Is it only families and families by marriage that can visit prisoners?
You can, well, in New York State, your parents, your children, your spouses, right? Yeah.
But your friends? Can
No,
you
your
get
friends,
visited?
no, security
So you fell
issues.
in love via the letters.
Yes.
And so what was that first face-to-face encounter like?
Well, I had certainly had yet to acknowledge to myself that I was in love.
Okay.
So I'm thinking, this is a great guy, and when he comes home, I hope we can be like brother and sister.
Wow.
And and
This had been after a year.
yeah, right. This is my buddy. But actually, it was my dear friend Rose who made me take a look at what I was feeling.
Wow.
It was Rose, and she asked the hard questions.
Wow.
And that's when I had to say, yeah, I
And
love
did
him.
it matter to your friends or family, the people that were around you that you wanted to support, what your prospective husband was incarcerated for, or it didn't matter? When you said, he's incarcerated, is there a spectrum of what's acceptable and not to be? What did you find in terms of that stigma Tony was talking about?
That's a great question. For me, the experience I had was the reaction itself to incarceration
was global.
was enough.
Right.
That because the feeling was you're selling yourself short. You can do better than that. Why would you be with someone who's committed a crime?
Please.
Right. So it was that incarceration itself was enough to make people. That said, there's certainly, and his crime was murder. He was a drug dealer. At some point, was in a struggle with another drug dealer, and one thing led to another. Joe got that young man's gun and shot him. And what he says now is that, of course, he is very remorseful.
Yeah, how does he feel about that?
Well, very remorseful, but he really his feeling is that part of what he needs to do is honor the potential of that young man who died. That part of his journey and part of his goal is to do things to honor that potential.
So how does he do that?
Joe is all about giving back. He has started several organizations. One is called the Second Look Think Tank. And it is.
How do you start an organization from prison?
There are things you can have a quote unquote inmate approved organization. In other words, it has to be approved by the system, by the authorities. But this organization is one. He has another one called the Civic Duty Initiative, and that one is about really giving back to the community outside. So, for example, they adopted an organization in Brooklyn called Children of Promise. And, of course, people who are incarcerated make next to no money, but they were able to collect $350, I think, for the children. They just did a book drive for the children, and we sent the books to Children of Promise. They did a gun buyback program for a minister in Albany. So these kinds of things, that's his mission.
It's so amazing to think, like, you talk about this struggle, and it could just as easily have been Joe, because it's the community and the options. This is so linked. I know you speak about this in your book, but to poverty, to options in community. It is really so amazing.
Right, yeah, and it is, and that's well said. It is about options, or the options you see.
Right. Or you're unaware of the other options.
Right.
I'm a little concerned. We can't sit here and stereotype communities and say just because you live in a certain community, you will have a certain experience.
No.
We can say that exposure and opportunity does inhibit.
Absolutely.
Potential.
Right. No, because I think that point is well taken. For many young people, they don't see other options. For many young people, they do not know that there's another way.
And for many, they don't see a life beyond 20, 21,
Exactly.
22.
That is
And so
true.
Well, we're talking about a system where many young people are growing up and they don't realize what opportunities they might have accessible to them. The options that perhaps they do see are just the worst options that you really could pick for yourself personally, or for your community, or for your family. So it's interesting to hear about Joe's enlightenment as he's in prison, because you were talking about there's no access to internet. So what is happening in the system that might offer some opportunity to inmates while they are incarcerated?
The Riverside Church Ministry, Prison Ministry.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Well, I think there clearly are organizations, advocates who do the best they can in terms of providing community support, volunteer efforts, etc. In terms of the system itself, it really is not easy. It's more, unfortunately.
Is it like punitive? I mean, is that what it's about?
It is,
It's
and I
penal.
was going to
It's a penal
say
system.
it. Right,
Seriously.
right. No,
Yeah.
no. But that is it. It's in this country. It is more about warehousing. It is, and it's about punishment. It is not about rehabilitation, and that
So we're
is.
throwing away so many people because they've made a mistake, and some may not have made a mistake, and they're just
And
there.
I guess, you know, what as I listen to you and I hear about your experience and your journey with Joe, what I can't help but feel is that we have a system that doesn't understand and appreciate the circumstances that lead many to prison. And so we treat everyone in prison as though they are hardcore, ruthless,
Dehumanized.
dehumanized, like people without hearts and spirits and souls. And that, you know, your journey with Joe has led you to really understand and appreciate that there are many people behind those bars that are like you and me.
That have
Just-
something to offer the
Right.
world. And this is a perfect segue to this think outside the cell. And even the title, after having this conversation with you, has take on so many layers of meaning. So if you could share with us what is inside Think Outside the Cell and you and Joe's journey in putting this series together.
Absolutely. This Think Outside the Cell, the Entrepreneur's Guide, that was our first book.
How about that? The Entrepreneur's Guide.
Yeah,
Right. Because a
yeah.
lot of those people in prison, those young men, are entrepreneurs.
Exactly, right. And Joe actually started, once he decided that he was going to do his time a certain way. He decided that he would have purpose, he would have meaning, and so one of those things involved entrepreneurship. He built his own library. He doesn't smoke, but he would trade cigarettes for books. And he became the go-to person for entrepreneurship. He just started doing classes, taught hundreds of men. But he said, I've read hundreds of books. I have yet to read a book specifically for incarcerated people. So he said, I'll have to write it myself. And that's what he did. He wrote
With
the
your
book.
support, though.
Yes, absolutely, with my support.
Right.
He wrote the book, often longhand, send it to me, I type it.
You were right there.
Absolutely.
Sheila,
Yeah.
there's something that I didn't catch. Perhaps you mentioned it or did not. How old was Joe when he went into prison?
Joe was
20?
21. 21.
That's in college.
Yeah.
Yes.
So he's still a young man.
Yes, he's still right.
Right.
He is.
But I mean, but just his maturity.
Well, you're a young woman, but
You know, his maturity and his appreciation. I mean, you know, these very formative adult years have been spent in prison, but he has developed, as you talk
To me,
about.
it's
him.
amazing that he has been able to thrive
Right.
in an environment like that. Is
Has
that
he-
the exception? Is he the exception?
You know, what I always say is that you'll find in prison what you find outside. Some exceptional people, some couch potatoes, you know,
so exceptional
right? Yeah,
people.
not so exceptional people. And Joe is among those who are exceptional, and he surrounds himself with good people.
and he's
Yeah.
been there. I mean, I don't know where he is, if he's been in the same prison the
No,
entire
he's
time.
traveled around the state.
You know, so that
Traveled
is-
around the state.
Yeah, and
So now when, I mean, Joe sounds like he, as you said, an exceptional prisoner. He sounds like he is just, you know, like one that is probably, you know, like doesn't get into any issues or trouble. So let's say that he is released in just a few years. Are you at this point thinking about that? Are you?
Yes, all the time.
And tell me, are
All
you
the
like?
time.
I mean, it's like, you know, I remember, you know, going out on like blind dates, right? And it's like that moment when you meet the person or you see him. I know you've seen him face to face, but your world is going to change. You've known him in
doubt.
one way. What does that
Right.
feel like?
It feels like an adventure I mean, it really does. And I say that because I will be able to see this world anew. The city, I mean, I'm from St. Louis, he's a New Yorker, but for someone who hasn't been in this world for almost a quarter of a century, what will it be? Right, the internet, when I walk down the street and I think, or if I'm in a taxi and I'll see the little television, I'll say, he's never seen this. There will be things that I take for granted that he will say, wow, isn't that incredible? Isn't that, I mean, what an adventure it will be.
You're going to continue to write when he gets out.
Yes. Well, we said we would.
Right.
We said we'd continue to write letters. We'll see.
Right.
Now, at the risk of making it sound rosy, it's not rosy in prison. It's just not.
No, it is not.
So day to day, what kinds of experiences are these men and women having in these locked up situations?
You're always on guard. You are always tense. I think that I have never, until I met people who are incarcerated, I thought I knew what being perceptive meant, but I really didn't. Their antennae are up so high that there have been times when Joe will tell me what I'm thinking. He'll say, I know so-and-so just walked into the room and I could see you tense up a little and blah, and I'm thinking I'm not tense, but I am. But I have to acknowledge that because their antennae are so high because anything can happen at any time. Now he's in a facility that is really considered rather low key.
Now, Ellen, you wanted to pick up on a point.
Struck. The whole time we've been talking, thinking about how your relationship began over the course of a series of letters you're still writing to your husband, and that it could have been 100 years ago when people correspond. That was the primary means of correspondence. It's not that it's arcane; it's fascinating. And you revealed yourself through these letters, and now you see your husband every couple weeks, and you have conjugal visits. But it just seems to me that so many people outside of the cell can't sustain a relationship or a marriage over so much less. And that you are just in there thinking about, you're looking forward clearly to your husband's release, but also what it takes. You're checking in and you're saying, this is worth it to me, and I'm going to work for this, and I'm going to wait for this.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely. We know that it is worth it. It is worth it. It is not easy. We have, I think one of the things that we really are clear about is that one of the things we don't have is things happening in real time. Right. So that if
layer of stress.
Right, yes. So that if something's happening in my world and I say, oh God, I just need to speak to Joe. Well, I can't. I can't pick up a phone.
Right.
He can call, I cannot call. If there is an issue or if it's something good and we're saying,
he has a son.
He has a son.
He talked about it.
Joseph, right? His son Joseph.
And there were issues with him.
Exactly. Right. And if we need to communicate with somebody about that, I can't just turn to Joe and say, what are we going to do about this?
Have you ever had an argument?
We have quiet arguments. We don't yell at each other. We grow silent.
Right. I think he said withdraw.
Right. Exactly. Right. Yeah.
So do you have arguments via letters? You know what I mean?
We are so honest, and I think letters allow that probably more than other types of communication because you really are focused and you really are not only engaged with him, but you're engaged with your thought process. So there aren't these other distractions. So you really get to your truth. And it's cathartic.
You can edit before you say
right, it's true. But it's cathartic. It becomes cathartic.
Have you been able to build any kind of community around the other women that are there in the system at all?
Yes,
and
absolutely.
how have you been able to support them? Because it seems like you're very mature. and you're able to work through some of this? Have you been able to offer support, or do you see that as something you feel you
Yes,
should do?
no,
Okay.
no, I do. I do offer support, and I find it case by case. And I think it's kind of like any community. There are people who seek you out, people who are drawn to you and you're drawn to, other people who, for whatever reason, are closed or suspicious. And you can understand that in that system. So that it is case by case. But yes, but not only through that, but through the work. Through our work, we seek to support people. Through the books, we're now doing films, through our workshops.
And your website. You have that great website.
Right, thinkoutside-the-cell.org. And through all kinds of things, our self-help, our self-development, through conversations, through
So
panels,
let me ask you
etc.
a question. You know, the one-on-one is great. Joe writing the book and you writing the book to help other people, but advocacy and real change happens with policy.
It does.
You know, so how can we, kind of back to your point,
And then
Danielle,
we'll have to close right there.
you know,
That's a great
like
question.
give us a
Right.
closing thought on what we can do to move this conversation. You know, I don't know, Tony. You
That
know, we
is
always like to say, what
fantastic.
can we do?
Right.
Right, no,
You know?
but that is a great question, because one of the things, it is about changing policy, about changing practices. And one of the things you can do is help us end the stigma of incarceration. And on our website is information what a range of stakeholders, and we're all stakeholders in this,
Absolutely.
what a range of stakeholders can do.
Excellent. Well, this was great. And this is all the time we have for this episode of Brooklyn Savvy. Sheila, you are phenomenal. Thank you for the wonderful work you're doing. You have inspired me in many, many ways.
Well, I
many
thank
ways.
all of you
many ways.
phenomenal women. Thank you. Thank you all.
Great. And we will see you next time on Brooklyn Savvy.